I was 22 years old the Christmas I learned what ready meant. Before December 1883, I thought I knew. I'd spent 2 years training as a nurse, assisting Dr. Harrison in our Montana mining town of 300 souls. I could set a broken bone, deliver a baby, mix powders for fever and pain. I kept a notebook of every procedure I'd witnessed, every treatment I'd prepared correctly. Evidence. Proof I was learning. Insurance against the doubt I saw in everyone's eyes when they realized their medical care depended partly on a girl barely past girlhood. Papa had said nursing was respectable work for women. He meant safe, small, appropriate. I meant to prove it could be more than that. Dr. Harrison was a good teacher when he remembered I was there. Most days he forgot, distracted by his own thoughts or his whiskey or both. I'd learned to make myself essential quietly. The clinic belonged to him, but the order within it, the clean instruments, the stocked supplies, the careful records that was mine. December brought the usual rhythms: miners with frostbite, children with winter coughs. Mrs. Chen's daughter Sarah sliced her hand badly on broken glass while I was alone in the clinic. Dr. Harrison had ridden out to the Mallory Ranch to treat a ranch hand's infected wound. Sarah was 8, bleeding fast, her mother's face tight with worry and something else. Doubt. Maybe fear that I wasn't enough. I cleaned the wound, stitched it with hands steadier than my heartbeat, wrapped it in clean linen. Sarah stopped crying halfway through. When I finished, Mrs. Chen thanked me with words that sounded genuine and eyes that still held questions. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought 2 years made me capable. I believed hard work could solve anything that walked through our door. The town was preparing for Christmas. Pine garlands appeared on doorways. The boarding house began planning their annual dinner. Mrs. Cooper invited me personally, her way of saying I belonged here now. I accepted, feeling something like pride, something like confidence. I spent my evenings reviewing my notebooks by lamplight, testing myself on treatments, preparing for emergencies that seemed manageable in the abstract. Burns, breaks, difficult births, things that happened in mining towns, things I'd assisted with, things I believed I could handle if Dr. Harrison wasn't available. December 19th, I wrote in my journal, 73 days without a serious medical crisis. I'm ready if something comes. I had no idea what ready meant. I had no idea that within 24 hours, death would walk into our town and change everything I thought I understood about medicine, about myself, about what one person could carry alone. December 20th started ordinary. Cold morning, clear sky, the kind of winter day that felt clean and manageable. I was restocking supplies when Mrs. Miller arrived, supported by her husband, violently ill. Dr. Harrison examined her while I prepared the exam room. I watched his face change from concern to something harder. Fear. Though he tried to hide it, when he spoke, he wouldn't meet my eyes. Cholera. One word. It landed like a stone in still water, and I felt the ripples spread through my chest. I'd read about cholera in my textbooks, knew the symptoms, the treatments, the mortality rates printed in clean black ink on white pages. But textbook knowledge was nothing like the reality of someone dying 6 feet away from me. The smell hit first, then the sounds, the terrible sounds a body makes, trying to expel death. Nothing in my notebooks had prepared me for this. By afternoon, 3 more cases arrived. Among them, a ranch hand named Samuel Gray. Mid-30s, I guessed, delirious with fever when they brought him in. I barely noticed him as a person he was symptoms to assess, pulse to monitor, fever to track. Patient number 4, that's how I labeled him in my notes. But I noticed his hands. Work-scarred, but clean. The kind of hands that belonged to someone who cared about details. Strange thing to write. Strange thing to remember later. Dr. Harrison and I worked without sleep. December 20th became the 21st, became the 22nd. Cases multiplied faster than we could count. The doctor stopped explaining his decisions to me, stopped teaching. He'd bark orders, and I'd follow them precisely. No time to think, only act. I noticed him looking toward the door more often, checking the window. His hands shook when he measured laudanum. I told myself he was exhausted. We both were. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, moving between patients, boiling water, enforcing the hygiene protocols Dr. Harrison insisted upon. Wash hands, boil everything. Keep the sick separated from the well. People were dying anyway. 15 dead by December 22nd. 15 people we couldn't save despite following every protocol, trying every treatment the medical books recommended. I kept working because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging how terrifying this was. How far beyond my training. How completely unprepared I felt. Samuel Gray survived the worst of it. By the 22nd, his fever had broken. He was one of maybe a dozen who'd recovered, who were past contagion. I barely registered this fact. He was just one less patient requiring constant monitoring. Midnight on the 22nd. I fell asleep standing up. Woke when Dr. Harrison caught my elbow, steadied me. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll need our strength tomorrow." I should have heard the goodbye in his voice. Should have recognized the finality in those words. But I was too tired to hear anything except dismissal. Too grateful for permission to sleep to question why he suddenly cared about my rest. I collapsed onto the cot in the back room and sank into darkness. December 23rd. Dawn came gray and cold. I woke after 3 hours of sleep to silence. The clinic was too quiet. My exhausted mind registered this slowly, piecing together wrongness from absence of sound. Dr. Harrison's office door stood open. His medical bag, the battered leather case he'd carried for 20 years, was gone. I walked through the empty rooms in a daze. His family's living quarters above the clinic. Abandoned. The stable behind, his horse missing, he'd fled. Sometime in the night, while I slept. Dr. Harrison had packed his family and run to Helena. I stood in his empty office, taking inventory. 15 dead, 23 actively sick, no qualified doctor. Just me. A 22-year-old girl with 2 years of training and a growing certainty that I wasn't enough. Would never be enough. My hands were shaking. I gripped the desk to steady them, forced myself to breathe. Someone would come. Another doctor. Help from Helena. Something. Someone qualified would arrive and take this impossible weight off my shoulders. Miss Hartwell. I turned. Samuel Gray stood in the doorway, recovered enough to be standing, dressed and steady. One of the lucky ones who'd survived. "Dr. Harrison is gone," I said. The words came out flat. He took his family to Helena. Samuel absorbed this without visible reaction. Then, "Tell me what to do. You should leave." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant. "Everyone who can leave should leave. This is going to get worse before it gets better." He shook his head. "My sister's family is here. The Kowalskis married Peter Kowalski 3 years back. They've got 2 little ones. I'm not leaving them. I'm not leaving any of them." He met my eyes steadily. "So tell me what to do." I didn't want his help. I wanted someone qualified. Someone who actually knew what they were doing. But qualified had fled to Helena in the middle of the night. And dying people don't wait for perfect. I kept thinking someone else would come. A real doctor. A miracle. Anyone who belonged in this situation more than I did. But the only person who came was a ranch hand asking for orders from a girl pretending to be competent. "Boil water." I finally said, "We'll need hundreds of gallons. Everything has to be boiled water. Linens, instruments, everything. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I'm 22 years old and I'm terrified. The words escaped before I could stop them. He didn't react to my admission. Just said what else. I gave him a list. Tasks to keep him busy, to keep me from screaming, to create the illusion that we had any control over this catastrophe. He listened carefully, asked one clarifying question, then got to work. I watched him haul water buckets without complaint, without questioning my authority, without suggesting I didn't know enough. His assumption of my competence felt like a lie we were both agreeing to tell. I could live with that lie if it kept people alive. December 24th. We developed a rhythm. Samuel Gray and I. A wordless choreography born of necessity and exhaustion. I moved between our 3 makeshift hospitals, the clinic, the church, the schoolhouse, assessing patients, making treatment decisions, trying to remember everything Dr. Harrison had taught me. 30 patients now, scattered across town. I carried my medical bag and my notebooks, and a growing sense that none of it was enough. Samuel followed instructions exactly. Boiled water endlessly. Enforced quarantine, keeping families separated from their sick. Delivered messages between the well and the ill. Carried patients who couldn't walk. Sat with the dying when I couldn't be in 2 places at once. Small kindnesses appeared at the edges of my awareness. Coffee beside me, still hot, exactly when I needed it. When I snapped at him for moving a patient incorrectly, my fear emerging as anger, he didn't defend himself. Didn't argue, just corrected the positioning and moved on. He learned my patterns faster than I'd expected. I'd reach for clean linens and find them already laid out. A patient would need repositioning, and he'd already moved them. I'd be about to request laudanum for pain management, and he'd appear at my elbow, holding the brown bottle. I noticed these things clinically. Efficient partnership. Nothing more. I couldn't afford warmth. Couldn't afford to see him as anything but hands helping me work. A body sharing impossible labor. I called him Mr. Gray. He called me Miss Hartwell. We kept our words to necessary information dosage instructions, patient updates, supply needs. I told myself it was professional. Truth was, I couldn't afford to see him as human. Couldn't afford to see anyone as human right now. If I did, I'd have to acknowledge what we were living through. I'd have to feel it. He never once asked if I was sure about a treatment decision. Never suggested I didn't know what I was doing. In a world where men constantly questioned my capabilities, doubted my judgment because of my age and sex. His assumption of my competence felt radical. I didn't trust it. Couldn't let myself trust it. But I relied on it anyway. More water in the church, I'd say. And he'd already be moving. Mrs. Anderson needs repositioning every 2 hours. And he'd nod. Pull out his pocket watch. Make a note. Enforce the quarantine, no visitors, no matter how much they beg. And he'd plant himself at the church door like an immovable wall. Gentle, but firm. The work became our language. Boil water, enforce hydration, prevent contamination, reduce fever, repeat endlessly. If I focused on tasks, I didn't have to think about the 17, number 18 now, people I'd failed to save. Didn't have to think about how many more I'd fail. December 24th, evening. The sun set early, winter stealing daylight. I was in the clinic measuring doses for the night when Samuel appeared with bread and coffee. He set them on the desk. Waited. I don't have time. When did you last eat? I couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before, eat, he said. Not an order. A request that sounded like concern. I ate standing up, too tired to argue. The coffee was exactly how I took it, barely any sugar. Strong enough to taste like determination. When had he learned that? When had he paid enough attention to my habits to know how I preferred my coffee? Thank you, Mr. Gray, I said when I finished. He nodded and left to check on patients in the church. After he was gone. I stood in the quiet clinic and wondered when his footsteps had become familiar. When had I started listening for them? Finding comfort in knowing he was nearby? Dangerous thoughts. I pushed them away and returned to work. Christmas morning arrived without mercy, December 25th. I woke before dawn to the sound of someone calling for help from the church. 37 sick now. 37 people spread across 3 buildings, all needing care I wasn't qualified to provide. Somewhere, families were celebrating, singing carols, opening gifts, believing in miracles and goodness and joy. I was counting the dying and wondering which miracle I was supposed to pray for more survivors, or the strength to bury more bodies. Sarah Miller died at mid-morning. She was 24 years old, 2 years older than me. She had 2 small children, a husband who loved her, a whole life spread out before her. I'd tried everything I knew: hydration, temperature management, careful monitoring. I'd followed every protocol, checked my notebooks twice, done everything right according to the limited knowledge I possessed. She died anyway. Her husband, Thomas, held her hand at the end. When it was over, when I'd checked for a pulse that wasn't there, when I had to step back and acknowledge defeat, he looked up at me with devastated eyes. "Please," he said. "Please save her. Please." I had to say it out loud. Had to form the words I'd been avoiding for 5 days. I don't know how. They cost me something I wouldn't get back. Some last piece of the confident girl who'd thought 2 years of training made her capable. Thomas collapsed over his wife's body. I stood there, useless, unable to offer comfort because I had 18 other patients waiting and grief was a luxury I couldn't afford, and if I started feeling this, I'd never stop. I made it outside before the shaking started. Behind the church, out of sight. I dry heaved against the wall. Empty stomach. Nothing to bring up but failure and terror. Miss Hartwell. Samuel's voice. I couldn't look at him. Couldn't let him see me breaking. He appeared beside me anyway, holding bread wrapped in cloth. "Sit," he said. 5 minutes. "I don't have time. 5 minutes. Eat." Something in his tone not commanding, not pitying, just certain made me obey. I sat on the cold ground and took the bread mechanically. While I ate, words started spilling out. Not to him exactly, just out. Into the winter air. Like if I said them aloud, they'd weigh less. I counted wrong. Thought we had 15 dead. It's 17 now. No. 18? Sarah makes 18. My voice sounded strange, detached. I keep going over every decision. Did I give her too much laudanum? Not enough wrong treatment entirely. I'll never know if someone better. Could have saved her, Papa used to say. Do your best. That's all anyone can ask. But what if your best isn't enough? What if people die because you're not good enough, not trained enough, not ready enough? Sarah Miller was a mother. I continued. She had children, a life, and I couldn't save her. I keep wondering what I missed, what someone more experienced would have seen, would have tried. You've saved 11. Samuel interrupted quietly. Dr. Harrison saved none. He ran. Something broke inside me. I put my head in my hands and let myself cry for exactly 30 seconds. Counted them. Allowed myself that much. No more. Then I stood up, wiped my face with my ruined hands, and went back to work. But he'd seen behind the wall now, had witnessed the fear I couldn't show anyone else. I couldn't take that back. Didn't entirely want to. December 26th brought a new crisis. The town well was contaminated, making people sicker. We needed clean water, but the nearest uncontaminated spring was 2 miles outside town. I stood in the clinic doing impossible mathematics. 37 patients, each needing at least a gallon of clean water daily. The spring was 2 miles out. Samuel could carry maybe 2 gallons per trip. 4 miles round trip, multiple trips per day, and someone still needed to monitor the patients constantly. I couldn't leave the sick. He couldn't haul enough water alone. We were paralyzed by logistics. Mrs. Chen recovered yesterday, Samuel said, studying my face. And the Kowalski boys, Peter's brothers, they're past contagion. We could ask them to help. I stared at him. Why hadn't I thought of that? Because I'd been trying to do everything myself. Even delegating to Samuel had felt like admitting weakness. But watching the certainty in his face, I realized survival isn't individual, it's communal. The town wasn't surviving because of me. It was surviving because we were holding each other up. You're right, I said. The words came easier than expected. Can you organize them within 2 hours? We had a system. Recovered patients formed water crews, hauling clean water from the spring. Others ran supplies between our makeshift hospitals. Mrs. Chen, fierce and grateful, took over basic patient care repositioning, feeding, cleaning under my supervision. I remained the medical authority, making all treatment decisions. But Samuel became the coordinator, managing people, solving logistical problems, creating order from chaos. I stopped giving orders and started asking questions. What do you think? Became a phrase I used. His opinion mattered. We were problem-solving together, and somewhere in that shift, the burden became lighter. I noticed the change in my own speech. I need more water became, we need more water. I can't handle this alone became, we'll figure this out. Small words, seismic shift. That evening, Mrs. Chen brought soup from her kitchen, her way of saying, thank you for letting her help. For giving her something to do besides worry about her daughter's healing hand. Samuel carried 2 bowls to the clinic, set one in front of me, kept one for himself. We sat together for 10 minutes while I ate. Didn't talk. We were too exhausted for conversation. But the silence was companionable, not empty, comfortable, not awkward. I realized I'd been less alone today than any day since December 20th. The epidemic still raged. People were still dying, but I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Thank you, I said quietly. Samuel looked up from his soup. For what? For staying? For helping? For... I gestured vaguely at everything, the impossible weight we were sharing. He nodded. Didn't say it was nothing, didn't diminish it, just acknowledged it. After he left, I sat in the quiet clinic and let myself feel something besides fear, for the first time in 6 days. Not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. The understanding that survival could be shared. That partnership might be the only thing keeping either of us standing. I returned to my patients before the feeling could settle too deeply. December 27th, midnight. I sat in the clinic surrounded by medical books, searching for something I'd missed. 3 more deaths today, 20 dead total, including Emma Kowalski, 8 years old. She'd liked ribbons. Her mother told me while I tried to save her. All colors. Had a whole collection. Past tense waiting to happen. I'd given her laudanum for pain. Too much, not enough wrong treatment entirely. The books didn't say, the books never said enough. I couldn't save her. I'd tried everything I knew, and it wasn't enough. I found myself packing my bag, not consciously deciding to leave, just mechanically folding my spare dress, gathering my few possessions. My hands moved of their own accord while my mind stayed numb. If Dr. Harrison could flee, why couldn't I? What was I accomplishing here besides watching people die? These deaths were on me. Every wrong choice, every failed treatment, every child who stopped breathing, all of it was my responsibility and my failure. Miss Hartwell. Samuel stood in the doorway. He didn't ask what I was doing. The half-packed bag made it obvious. He crossed the room. sat down in the chair across from me, and waited. The silence stretched. Minutes. Maybe. I couldn't look at him. Finally, words came. Terrible. True words I'd been holding back for a week. I'm killing them. My voice was flat. Dead. Every choice I make is wrong. That child today, Emma, I gave her laudanum. But was it too much? Not enough, I don't know. I'll never know. I'm 22 years old, and I'm practicing medicine on dying people because the real doctor ran away. I looked at my hands, ruined from lye soap and boiling water and constant washing. Hands that had held Emma's while she died. 22, I repeated. 2 years of training. I'm playing doctor, playing at something I'm not qualified for. They're dying anyway. Maybe they'd die slower without me making mistakes. I remembered my first day assisting Dr. Harrison. He'd said medicine was humbling, that I'd make mistakes, that the trick was making mistakes. People could survive. But what about the mistakes they couldn't survive? What about when your mistake was a child in a coffin? Maybe I should leave. I whispered, let someone else come. Someone who actually knows what they're doing. Samuel didn't speak immediately. When he did, his voice was measured, honest. You're right. I looked up, startled. You might be making wrong choices. He continued. You might not be qualified enough. Might not know enough. All of that might be true. He leaned forward. But wrong choices with someone trying are better than no choices with no one here. If you leave, they have nothing. If you stay, they have a chance. That's all anyone has in an epidemic, a chance. He wasn't telling me I was doing well. Wasn't offering false comfort. Just making the stakes brutally clear my presence or absence. Not my perfection. I started unpacking my bag slowly, refolding the dress, replacing my hairbrush. I can't keep doing this alone, I said. The admission hurt. I'm drowning. Then let me stand in the water with you. Not a rescue. Not him saving me. A commitment to shared burden. To staying in the terrible water together because that's what survival required. I nodded, throat too tight for words. We sat there in the lamplight. Two exhausted people who'd seen too much death. And something shifted. Some wall I'd been maintaining came down. Not completely, but enough. Enough to let someone else stand beside me in the drowning. December 28th. No new cases in 24 hours. The existing patients were either stabilizing or dying. We'd reached the epidemic's crest. I should have felt relief. Should have celebrated. Instead, I felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything but exhaustion. Samuel and I were boiling instruments in the clinic. We'd been doing this for 8 days straight. He moved with the same careful competence he'd shown from the beginning, precise, thorough, anticipating what needed sterilizing next. I watched him work. Really watched him. Maybe for the first time since this started. He'd been awake as long as I had. Worked as hard, carried as much weight. He'd seen me at my worst, terrified, inadequate, breaking and stayed anyway. Not because he wanted to save me, because he understood that survival was collective work. When this is over, I heard myself say, you'll go back to the ranch. He paused mid-motion, set down the instrument he'd been holding. If you want me to. And I realized I didn't want him to go. Not because I was helpless without him, not because I needed rescuing, but because partnership had become survival itself. Because shared burden was lighter. Because two people working in rhythm accomplished more than one person working alone. When had he stopped being Mr. Gray, the ranch hand helping? When had he become Samuel, My partner, I couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had happened in small increments, shared looks over patients' beds. Wordless coordination. The way he'd learned to anticipate my needs before I voiced them. Partnership had crept up on me while I was too busy surviving to notice. "I don't want you to go," I said. The next words stuck in my throat. Need. That word carried so much weight. My whole life, needing people had meant weakness. Had meant being lesser. Being inadequate. Being not enough on my own. But watching Samuel work, I understood needing someone isn't weakness when you're building something together. It's foundation. I need help. I forced out, not just now, but after, when Dr. Harrison comes back. Or doesn't. When the town needs rebuilding, a real clinic, a better system, I can't do it alone. Papa had taught me to be self-sufficient. Don't need anyone. He'd said, that way, you're never disappointed. I'd built my whole life on that principle. But Papa had never faced an epidemic. Had never learned that some things are too big for one person, no matter how self-sufficient. Samuel crossed to me, took my hands in his. They were as ruined as mine, raw from lye soap and boiling water. Evidence of shared work. You're not alone. He said simply. I leaned into him, not from weakness, from choice. This was the moment, not him rescuing me, but me choosing partnership over martyrdom. Me actively deciding that shared survival was stronger than isolated struggle. He'd seen everything ugly about me, my fear, my inadequacy, my breaking point. He'd watched me cry, watched me pack to flee, watched me at my absolute worst, and he stayed. Not because he pitied me, because he understood that real strength isn't doing everything alone. It's knowing when to share the weight. Stay, I said. Help me build something better than what we had. Already am, he said. We stood there in the winter afternoon light filtering through the clinic windows. Two exhausted people who'd survived together. Who'd learned that survival wasn't individual achievement, it was collective endurance. I understood then what strength actually looked like. Not stoic isolation, not refusing help, not martyring yourself on the altar of self-sufficiency. Strength was standing in the water with someone else, sharing the drowning. Surviving together because that's the only way anyone survives. I'd spent my whole life believing I had to do everything alone to prove I was capable. That asking for help meant admitting defeat. That partnership diminished rather than doubled. That Christmas taught me different. Taught me that the strongest thing I ever did was say 3 words, I need help. And the bravest thing I ever did was let someone answer. The epidemic broke on December 30th. 23 dead, 77 recovered, 200 who never sickened. The mathematics of catastrophe, written in human lives. Dr. Harrison returned January 15th with apologies and justifications. His family's safety. The overwhelming nature of the crisis, fear. I listened politely and felt nothing. By then, Samuel and I had buried the dead, cleaned the town, and started planning a proper clinic. Actions matter more than explanations. The town knew who stayed and who fled. Samuel stayed. We worked together through January's aftermath, organizing proper burials, caring for orphan children, rebuilding the systems that had failed during crisis. Partnership became routine, became respect, became something deeper. I can't tell you when it became love. There was no lightning strike, no single moment of realization. It was gradual the way dawn comes to winter sky. Slow, steady, inevitable. We were too exhausted for quick romance. But working side by side, day after day, we built something stronger than passion. We built trust. We built a life based on shared work and mutual respect and the understanding that we were better together than apart. He'd seen me at my worst and stayed anyway. That became our foundation. We married that spring. Not because I needed rescuing or because he wanted to save me, because we'd learned how to save each other. And in saving each other, we'd learned how to save ourselves. Now we run the clinic together. He's not a doctor, but he's learned enough to assist, to manage the practical details that let me focus on medicine. We have 2 desks mine for medical records, his for supplies and schedules, 2 coffee cups in the morning, 2 sets of hands making the work lighter. I used to think needing someone diminished me. Now I know it doubles me. The town treats us as a unit. Dr. Harrison eventually left for Helena permanently. Reputation ruined. They ask for Miss Hartwell and Mr. Gray now. Not because we're perfect, but because we stayed. Because we survived together and built something better from the ashes. Every Christmas, we light candles for the 23 we lost. I speak their names aloud. Sarah Miller, Emma Kowalski, all of them. Samuel remembers them too. Shared grief, like shared work, is lighter. Then we light one more candle for the girl I was at 22. The girl who thought strength meant doing everything alone. The girl who learned, in the coldest December of her life, that surviving meant letting someone stand beside her in the water. That Christmas 1883 didn't give me a holiday miracle. It gave me something better, the knowledge that I was stronger with help than I ever was alone. I'd believed independence was strength, self-sufficiency was virtue. Needing no one was protection against disappointment and pain. The epidemic taught me different. Taught me that real strength is knowing when to share the weight. That asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That the strongest people aren't the ones who carry everything alone. They're the ones who know how to build partnerships that make survival possible. Samuel says I saved the town that December. He's wrong, but I let him believe it because the truth is more complicated. The truth is we saved each other. And in saving each other, we learned that survival isn't a solo achievement. It's a shared victory built on trust and partnership and the courage to say, I can't do this alone. I learned to stop trying to do everything alone the Christmas I was 22. That Christmas taught me that hearts are meant to be shared, that burdens are lighter when carried together, that the bravest word in the English language isn't I, it's we.